I didn't plan to dance with a stranger that night. I didn't plan to feel his hand on my waist, the warmth of his palm seeping through the thin fabric of my dress, the subtle command in the way he pulled me close, as if he'd known me forever, as if my body already belonged to him. I didn't plan for my heart to betray me and skip its rhythm when he leaned in, his breath a ghost against my neck, and whispered, "Dance with me. Your ex is watching." And just like that, everything stopped. The music blurred into a distant hum, laughter faded into the corners of the ballroom, and all I could hear was the pounding of my heart, wild and desperate, like it was trying to escape my chest. I didn't even look up at first. I was too startled by the voice, low, smooth, dangerous. It carried that kind of confidence that comes from men who don't ask for permission. His fingers tightened slightly, not in a way that hurt, but in a way that made it impossible to refuse. My gaze lifted slowly, and then I saw him. He wasn't supposed to be real. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a black suit that fit like sin. His dark hair slicked back, his jaw sharp enough to cut through the tension between us. His eyes, God, those eyes, were a shade between storm and night, and they watched me like I was something fragile and fascinating, something he might crush just to see how I'd break. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice shaking more than I wanted. He smiled, and that smile, it wasn't kind. It was dangerous, like the slow curl of smoke before a fire. "You looked like you needed saving," he said softly, the corner of his mouth lifting in amusement. "Or maybe you just needed a reason to stay." His words tangled inside me, confusing, disarming, too intimate for a stranger. I should have pulled away. I should have said no. But then I caught sight of Ethan, my ex, standing across the room, one hand tucked around the waist of some perfect plastic woman, his smug grin aimed right at me, daring me to fall apart. And suddenly, I understood. The stranger wasn't offering a dance. He was offering me armor. So I did the only thing that made sense in that dizzying moment of panic and pride. I let him lead me. His hand guided mine to his chest, and the music, slow and heavy, wrapped around us. The chandelier above scattered light across his face, gilding his cheekbones, brushing the outline of his lips, and for a fleeting second I forgot the reason I'd come to the gala in the first place. I forgot about Ethan. I forgot about everything. "You shouldn't let him see you break," the stranger murmured, his voice barely audible over the violins. "Men like that, they feed on it." I blinked up at him, stunned by how easily he read me. "You don't even know me." He tilted his head slightly, eyes never leaving mine. "Don't I?" The way he said it made my pulse stumble. I could feel every heartbeat, every breath. I could feel him watching the way my chest rose when he drew me closer. The faint tremor in my fingers when his thumb brushed the inside of my wrist. It wasn't a dance anymore. It was something else. Something deliberate and dangerous. The air between us thickened with unspoken words. The orchestra swelled, violins melting into the rhythm of our steps. Around us, the crowd blurred into a swirl of sequins and champagne, laughter and gossip. I felt their eyes, Ethan's eyes, on us, and for once I didn't feel small. I didn't feel broken. I felt seen. "You're shaking," the stranger said quietly, and his voice dropped lower, almost tender. "Don't be afraid. If you're going to play a part, play it well." "I'm not playing," I managed, though I wasn't sure I believed it. He leaned down, close enough for his lips to brush the shell of my ear. "Good. Neither am I." The world tilted again. My knees went weak, my skin alive with 1,000 electric nerves. I tried to steady myself, but his hand tightened on my waist, grounding me. He smelled like cedar and smoke, like the kind of man who had walked through fire and never once looked back. And beneath all of that, the charm, the control, there was something darker. A shadow in his gaze. a danger that whispered of guns and secrets and power. When the music ended, he didn't let go right away. His thumb traced a slow, burning path along my spine. I felt like I was falling, and he was the only thing keeping me upright. Then, just as suddenly as he'd appeared, he released me. The space between us filled with silence, thick and charged. I could feel the ghost of his touch long after it was gone. He looked at me for one heartbeat longer, long enough to make me forget my own name, and then he smiled, slow and knowing. "You handled yourself well, Bella." I blinked. "Bella? It means beautiful." He adjusted his cufflinks like nothing had happened, like we hadn't just set fire to the air between us. "You should smile more when he's watching. It drives men like him insane." Before I could answer, he turned and walked away, moving through the crowd with effortless grace, people stepping aside without realizing why. Power radiated from him, not loud, not boastful, but in that subtle, lethal way that made every head turn. I should have followed him with my eyes, but I didn't. I couldn't. My thoughts were too loud, my pulse too wild. Instead, I looked down at my trembling hands and tried to convince myself that none of this meant anything. It was just a dance, a performance, nothing more. But when I reached for my clutch, my fingers brushed against something new. A black business card slipped into the silk without me noticing. I turned it over, and my breath caught. Luca Romano. Below the name, a single phrase in silver ink. "For when you want to dance again." My stomach twisted, a strange mixture of dread and curiosity curling inside me. I looked up, but he was gone. The ballroom had returned to its glittering rhythm, the orchestra playing another slow waltz, the laughter swelling as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. I could still feel Ethan's gaze burning into me from across the room, and I forced a smile I didn't feel. But it wasn't him I was thinking about anymore. It was Luca. The way he'd looked at me. The way he'd known exactly what I needed before I did. The way he'd made me feel alive in a room where I'd only felt invisible. I slipped the card into my purse, my heart still racing. I told myself I'd throw it away in the morning. I told myself he was just a stranger, a beautifully dangerous one, but a stranger nonetheless. But deep down, I already knew I wouldn't. Because for the first time in a long time, I wanted to dance again. And I had no idea the man who'd just whispered salvation into my ear was the devil himself. For 3 days, I stared at the black card like it was cursed. It sat on my vanity beneath the soft glow of my bedside lamp, its silver lettering catching the light every time I tried not to look at it, whispering to me in the silence that filled my apartment like a fog I couldn't escape. "For when you want to dance again." The words seemed to pulse with their own quiet rhythm, mocking my attempts to be rational, to convince myself that what had happened at the gala was nothing but a fleeting moment of defiance, a desperate attempt to feel powerful again in front of the man who had once taken all my power from me. I told myself it was over. I had danced with a stranger. He had made my ex jealous. I had walked away. End of story. But it wasn't. Because the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the weight of his gaze, the scent of smoke and something darker that clung to his skin, the way my heart had betrayed me by beating too fast when he leaned in close enough for his lips to brush my ear. I'd never met a man like Luca Romano, and that terrified me more than I wanted to admit. By the 4th day, my resolve began to crack. Ethan had started showing up again. It began innocently enough, if anything about Ethan could still be called innocent. A bouquet of roses on my desk at work. No note but his handwriting scrawled across the wrapping. "Miss me?" Then came the text messages, short and sharp, the kind designed to pierce under your skin. "I saw you at the gala." "Cute date. Does he know what a liar you are?" I deleted them, blocked his number, changed mine. But Ethan was the kind of man who collected people like currency. He always knew someone who could find me. And the way his shadow kept slipping into the corners of my life, the way the air seemed to tighten when I felt him watching me, it all made me realize one thing. Dancing with a stranger might have been reckless, but letting Ethan back into my world would be fatal. That night, as rain whispered against my window and the city lights bled through, the glass in smudged streaks of gold, I sat on the edge of my bed with the card in my hand. My thumb traced the embossed silver letters, and I wondered what kind of man had a card that didn't need a number, just a name. Still, when I turned it over, I saw the faint imprint of digits pressed into the black surface. A number, hidden in shadow. I hesitated for a long moment, listening to the rain, to my own breathing, to the echo of that night, the command in his voice, the way he'd looked at me as if he already knew what I would do. And then, with a trembling breath, I called him. The phone rang once. Ava. My name on his lips froze me. His voice was exactly as I remembered it. Smooth, dark, a melody laced with danger. How did you— I was waiting for you, he interrupted, his tone unhurried, calm, like he'd known this moment would come. You took longer than I expected. I swallowed hard, fingers gripping the phone tighter. You left your card. You must have known I'd call. I hoped you would, he said simply, as if that explained everything. Tell me, Bella, is your ex still watching? Something inside me shivered. You remembered? I remember everything about the way you looked at me, he murmured, like you were afraid to fall but already halfway down. I hated how his words made my pulse race. You don't know me. No, he agreed, and yet there was something in his tone that suggested he knew far more than he should. But I know men like him. I know what they take from women like you. And I know you called because part of you is tired of being afraid. My throat felt tight, my words small. I don't want him near me anymore. Then let me help you. The way he said it wasn't an offer, it was a statement, final and absolute. What does that mean? Come to Il Diavolo, he said. Tonight. The club? I'd heard of it, of course. Everyone had. Il Diavolo wasn't just a nightclub, it was a world unto itself. A sanctuary for the powerful, the rich, and the dangerous. It wasn't a place for women like me. But then again, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. Why? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Because I don't make promises over the phone, Luca said softly. And because you don't really want to say no. The line went dead before I could reply. For a long time I sat there in the silence, the hum of the city bleeding through the rain. I could still hear his voice, low and certain, wrapping around my name like a vow. And though every logical thought screamed at me to stay home, to forget him, to let the memory fade, I found myself standing, slipping into my black dress, painting my lips red, the same shade I'd worn that night. By the time I reached Il Diavolo, the rain had turned to mist. The club loomed like a secret carved into the bones of the city. Velvet lights spilling from its entrance. Guards in, tailored suits standing like statues. Inside, the air was thick with perfume and money, the music low and seductive. I felt eyes on me, hundreds of them. But it was his gaze I found immediately. Luca sat in a private corner, watching me as if he'd known the exact moment I'd arrive. He wore black again, but his presence made the color darker, sharper. When he stood, the room seemed to part for him. Bella mia, he greeted, the words wrapping around me like silk. I was beginning to think you'd lost your courage. Maybe I have, I murmured, though my feet carried me toward him anyway. He smiled then, slow, deliberate, the kind of smile that could both ruin and save a woman. Courage is not the absence of fear, Ava. It's knowing you're terrified and walking into the fire anyway. He extended his hand, and without thinking, I placed mine in his. The contact sent a spark through me, a recognition of something I didn't want to name. He led me to a secluded booth draped in shadow. Crystal glasses shimmered in the dim light. "You said you could help me?" I said finally, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. "What did you mean?" He poured 2 glasses of wine, his movements precise, elegant. "Ethan Grant," he said, his tone colder now, harder. "A man with influence but no spine. He's been following you, sending gifts, messages, threats." My breath caught. "How do you know that?" He didn't look away. "Because I had him followed." The words slammed into me, leaving me dizzy. "You... what? Why?" Luca leaned forward, eyes dark and unyielding. "Because the night we danced, I saw something in his eyes that I've seen 1,000 times before. The look of a man who believes a woman is his possession. And I don't tolerate men like that." I stared at him, torn between fear and fascination. "You barely know me." He smiled faintly. "You're right, but I know him, and that's enough." He took a slow sip of his wine, his gaze never leaving mine. "Let me protect you, Ava. I have the means, the influence, the power." My pulse quickened. "And what do you want in return?" He set his glass down, his smile fading. "Everything has a price," he said quietly, "but we'll discuss mine later." There it was, the warning, the invitation, the danger wrapped in velvet. "I'm not sure I can trust you," I whispered. His eyes softened slightly, though his voice remained steady. "I don't ask for trust, Bella. Only your honesty." I wanted to ask what that meant, but before I could, one of his men, a tall, scarred man in a dark suit, leaned down to whisper in his ear. Whatever he said made Luca's expression turn to steel. He stood abruptly, his chair sliding back. "Stay here," he ordered. "What's happening?" He turned to me, and the softness was gone from his face. "Your ex is outside." The world tilted again. "Ethan?" "Yes," he said, his tone deadly calm, "and he's not alone." He brushed a finger under my chin, tilting my gaze to his. "Don't move, Ava. The dance isn't over yet." Then he walked away, leaving me in the shadows, heart pounding, knowing that whatever line I'd crossed tonight, there was no going back. When Luca walked away that night, leaving me sitting in the dim corner of his club, with my pulse stuttering and my breath trembling against the edge of panic, I realized that fear could have layers, slow, thick ones, that crept up your throat and filled you until even your heartbeat felt too loud. The air in Il Diavolo was alive with something I couldn't name, that charged mix of perfume and smoke, lust and danger, laughter that never reached anyone's eyes, the kind of place where power hummed like electricity beneath the marble floor. And I suddenly understood that I wasn't supposed to be there. Not in this world, not in this seat, not in the orbit of a man like Luca Romano. The seconds stretched like wire. The music played on, lazy and slow, too soft to hide the echo of my thoughts. I could feel people watching me, their gazes sharp, curious, measuring. But I couldn't look away from the direction Luca had gone, the heavy doors that had closed behind him. I told myself I should leave, that I should run before whatever storm had arrived outside followed me in. But there was something in the way he had said, "Don't move." Not a request, not a suggestion, but an unspoken command that made it impossible to do anything else. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. I couldn't tell anymore. And then the doors swung open. Luca reappeared, that same unhurried grace in his stride. But the air around him was different now. Colder, heavier, charged with quiet violence. 2 of his men followed, dragging someone between them, and my heart clenched when I saw Ethan's face, pale and furious and afraid in a way I had never seen before. His jacket was torn, his hair damp from the rain, his lips twisted into a snarl when his gaze found me. "Ava!" he spat, his voice cracked with disbelief. "What the hell is this?" I stood before I realized I'd moved, my hands shaking. Ethan, But Luca's voice cut through mine, low and measured, the kind of calm that made everyone else go still. That's enough. He stepped closer to Ethan, and even without raising his voice, even without a single threat spoken aloud, he owned the air between them. You've been following her, Luca said. You've sent gifts, messages, pictures. You've watched her home. You've crossed a line. Ethan tried to laugh, but the sound came out brittle, breaking halfway through. Who the fuck are you? Luca smiled then, that slow, dangerous smile that didn't reach his eyes. Someone you should have left her to forget. One of his men pushed Ethan to his knees. The sound of it, the thud of bone against marble, made me flinch. I wanted to scream, to tell them to stop, to say this wasn't what I wanted, that I just wanted the fear to end, not this. But when I looked at Luca, at the sharp calmness of his expression, at the way he stood so close to Ethan without breaking a sweat, I realized that this was who he was. A man who didn't believe in warnings, only in lessons. Luca, please, I said, stepping forward before I could stop myself. You don't have to. He turned his head toward me, and though his eyes softened slightly, his voice stayed the same, controlled, deliberate. You think I'm doing this for me, Bella? He asked quietly. I'm doing this for you. I don't want this, I whispered. I just wanted him to leave me alone. And he will, Luca said, his gaze returning to Ethan. After tonight. Ethan looked up at me then, his eyes wide with a kind of fear I'd never seen in him before. Ava, what the fuck have you gotten yourself into? He hissed. Do you even know who this guy is? I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, I didn't know. Not really. Luca crouched down to Ethan's level, his voice almost kind, the way one might speak to a child who doesn't yet understand the rules. Here's what's going to happen, he said softly. You're going to walk out of this club alive. You're going to disappear. You're going to forget her name, her face, her voice. You're going to live your life as if she never existed. And if I ever hear that you've looked in her direction again... He paused, smiled faintly. You won't live long enough to regret it. There was no shouting, no theatrics, just words spoken with the certainty of a man who never made idle threats. Then he stood, gave a small nod, and his men dragged Ethan toward the exit. I watched in stunned silence as the doors closed again, the sound echoing through the low music. And for a moment I couldn't breathe. When I turned back to Luca, he was watching me, not with pride, not even with triumph, but with that same unreadable expression that seemed to sit somewhere between control and confession. What did you just do? I asked, my voice shaking. I kept my promise, he said simply. I told you I'd protect you. That wasn't protection, I said, the words tumbling out faster than I could control. That was necessary, he interrupted. Men like him don't understand boundaries. They only understand fear. He took a slow step toward me, and though I wanted to back away, I didn't. I'm not like him, Ava, he continued, his voice lowering. But don't mistake that for kindness. What do you want from me? I asked, because it was the only question that mattered now. He stopped in front of me, so close that I could feel the warmth of his breath, smell the faint trace of whiskey and smoke on his skin. I want honesty, he said. I want you to stop pretending that you don't feel what's happening between us. My pulse stuttered. You barely know me. His lips curved slightly. You keep saying that. But what if I told you I've known you longer than you think? The words hung there, heavy and confusing, and when I opened my mouth to ask what he meant, he only smiled, a slow, knowing thing that made my chest tighten. You'll understand soon enough, he murmured. Then, as if the moment had never existed, he turned toward the bar, poured 2 glasses of red wine, and handed one to me. His tone softened again. Casual, almost conversational. "You're safe now," he said. "At least for tonight." I wanted to believe him, but something in the way he said it made me realize that safety, in his world, was an illusion. We sat in silence for a while, the kind that hums with too many unspoken things. I watched him, the way he held his glass, the way the low light touched the scar on his jaw, the way his gaze seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. Finally, I said, "You keep talking about power and fear like they're the same thing." He glanced at me, amusement flickering briefly in his eyes. "They are," he said. "Fear is the currency of power. You make people fear losing something, and they'll give you everything." "And what do you fear losing?" I asked before I could stop myself. For a heartbeat, something flickered across his face. Too fast to catch. Too human to ignore. "Nothing," he said finally. "I lost everything once. After that, there's not much left to fear." He finished his wine and stood, the motion fluid, deliberate. "It's late," he said. "My driver will take you home." "I can go on my own." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That wasn't a request." He started to walk away, then paused, turning back just enough for his gaze to find mine one last time. "You asked what I want from you," he said quietly. "The answer is simple." I swallowed hard. "What?" He leaned closer, his voice low, his words brushing against my skin like a secret. "When the time comes, I'll tell you to dance again. And when I do, don't refuse me." Then he was gone, leaving behind nothing but the faint scent of smoke and something that felt disturbingly like longing. And for the first time since meeting him, I realized that maybe Luca Romano wasn't just saving me from my past. Maybe he was pulling me towards something far more dangerous. The night after Luca's warning was supposed to be silent, calm, a kind of uneasy stillness that settles in after the storm has passed. But nothing about my life felt calm anymore. Nothing about the world made sense now that I'd seen how effortlessly he could turn violence into poetry. How easily he could make a man like Ethan fall apart with nothing but a look and a few quiet words. I should have been afraid of him. I was afraid. But fear had taken on a different flavor. Richer somehow, intoxicating, threaded through with something that felt like desire and danger, and something I didn't want to name because if I did, it would become too real to undo. For days, I tried to go back to my normal life. My office job that felt smaller now, my coffee shop mornings, my long walks home under the city lights. But Luca's presence clung to me like smoke. He didn't call, he didn't text, he didn't appear. And yet I could feel him, like a shadow stretched too long, like the whisper of a song you can't forget. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw that look in his eyes when he told me don't refuse me. Then, on Friday evening, an invitation arrived. It came in a black envelope, sealed with a dark red wax crest shaped like a wolf's head, elegant and dangerous all at once. Inside, a single card, no name, no instructions, only a time and a place. Il Diavolo, 10 p.m. At the bottom, in that same slanted silver handwriting I knew too well, were the words, "Wear something red." I should have burned the invitation. I should have told myself that I'd already danced too close to something I didn't understand. But curiosity and fear are twins, and both led me to the same door that night. The club looked different this time. Louder, brighter, filled with faces dressed in elegance and sin, laughter spilling like champagne, the scent of money and lust thick in the air. Red lights bled through the dark corners, and everything shimmered, dangerous and beautiful. And then there he was. Luca stood near the bar, dressed in black as always, a crimson tie cutting through the darkness like a wound. When he saw me, his mouth curved in that slow, knowing smile that made the rest of the room disappear. "Bella mia," he greeted, his voice smooth and deep, sliding through the noise like silk. "You came." "You asked," I said, my pulse betraying me. His gaze drifted over me slowly, not like a man undressing a woman, but like one memorizing art. "Red suits you," he said, and the words felt heavier than they should have. "It's a color that doesn't apologize." Before I could respond, he took my hand, not asking, just taking, and guided me toward a private balcony overlooking the main floor. From up there, the crowd looked like a living ocean, every movement deliberate, every smile hiding something. "You brought me here to watch people?" I asked softly, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me, eyes glinting in the low light. "I brought you here to see my world." His hand brushed against the small of my back, and though it was barely a touch, it felt like fire. "Everyone down there owes me something," he said quietly. "Money, loyalty, secrets. That's how power survives. It feeds on debt." "And what about me?" I whispered. "Do I owe you something too?" He smiled, but there was something dark in it. "Not yet." A waiter appeared, silent and efficient, placing 2 glasses of champagne before us. Luca lifted his, the bubbles catching the light like gold dust. "To new beginnings," he said. I hesitated, but then lifted mine. "To dangerous ones," I replied, and his eyes softened, amused. The sound of glass meeting glass rang softly in the air. We stood there for a while, the city pulsing beneath us, music curling around us like smoke. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. Until I saw him. Ethan. He was at the edge of the crowd below, his face half hidden in shadow, his expression sharp and poisonous. My heart froze. "Luca," I whispered. "He's here." Luca's gaze followed mine, his jaw tightening, his entire body shifting in an instant. From composed to lethal, from silk to steel. "Stay here," he said quietly, already moving toward the stairs, but I grabbed his arm. "No, please don't." He looked down at me, his eyes colder than I'd ever seen them. "You don't understand, Ava. He wasn't supposed to be breathing near you again." "I don't want blood," I said, my voice trembling. "I just want this to end." He studied me for a long, quiet moment. Then he brushed a thumb against my cheek, and his touch was almost gentle. "Sometimes, Bella, the only way to end something is to burn it down." And before I could stop him, he was gone. What happened next unfolded like a slow-motion nightmare. Ethan saw Luca coming and tried to blend into the crowd, but it was pointless. People moved aside instinctively when Luca walked by, like water parting for something too dangerous to touch. I couldn't hear their words, but I could see the way Luca leaned in, the way Ethan's face shifted from anger to fear, the way one of Luca's men appeared beside him, waiting for a signal. Then everything shattered. Ethan lunged forward, shouting something I couldn't make out, and a gun flashed under the light. Screams tore through the music. The orchestra stopped mid-note. Champagne spilled across the marble as panic rippled through the room. I remember the sound of the gunshot. Loud, merciless, echoing. I remember the smell of gunpowder and fear. I remember Luca's body jerking as he moved, shoving someone out of the way, and then chaos consumed everything. By the time I reached the floor, security had swarmed. Ethan was gone, vanished into the chaos like smoke, and Luca was standing amidst the wreckage, blood blooming across his sleeve. "Oh my God," I whispered, running to him. "You're hurt." He looked at me, his expression steady even as crimson dripped from his arm. "It's nothing." "Nothing?" I pressed my hand to the wound. "You were shot, Luca." His hand closed over mine, firm, grounding. "He missed," he said, his voice low. "He won't next time." The way he said it, cold, certain, made me shiver. "Who are you?" I asked, the question spilling out like a plea. "Who are you, really?" He smiled faintly, though his eyes were unreadable. "The man you danced with," he said softly. "The man who keeps his promises." Then he looked over my shoulder, at his men moving through the crowd, cleaning up the chaos with the precision of people who'd done it 100 times before. "Take her to my car," he ordered one of them. "I'm not leaving without you," I said. He turned back to me, his face softening just a fraction. "You already did," he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "The moment you called me, you stepped into my world, and now, Bella Mia, there's no leaving it." The world spun again. Sirens in the distance, lights flickering. The taste of fear and champagne thick on my tongue. When his men guided me outside, the rain had started again, cold and steady. I turned back once, catching one last glimpse of him standing in the doorway of his blood-stained empire, his silhouette framed in gold light and shadow. He looked like sin wearing a suit, like danger wrapped in devotion, like the kind of man you can't stop wanting even when you know he'll ruin you. And as the car door closed behind me, I realized something terrifying. Somewhere between fear and desire, I had already chosen him. The morning after the shooting, I woke to the faint scent of leather, smoke, and antiseptic. The kind of sterile sharpness that doesn't belong to hospitals but to private rooms that money and power build to keep blood hidden from the public. I didn't remember falling asleep. I didn't remember being carried here. All I remembered was the sound of rain against the car windows, the echo of Luca's voice telling me I had already stepped into his world, and the way my heart had ached with a strange kind of longing that was equal parts fear and fascination. When I opened my eyes, I realized I was lying on a velvet couch, the kind too expensive to exist anywhere but in penthouses owned by men who thought the world existed to serve them. Heavy curtains covered the windows, but soft light filtered through, painting the room in shades of gray and gold. On the table beside me sat a glass of water, a folded cloth still stained with blood, and a single black rose resting in a crystal vase. Luca was standing by the window. He wasn't wearing his jacket, just a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and I could see the white bandage wrapped around his arm where the bullet had grazed him. He looked impossibly calm, staring out at the city as if the night before hadn't happened, as if chaos was just another language he spoke fluently. "You're awake," he said without turning. His voice was softer than usual, but there was still steel beneath it, a quiet authority that made the air hum. I sat up slowly, the blanket slipping from my shoulders. "Where am I?" "My home," he replied simply. "You fainted after the police arrived. I didn't think you'd want to answer their questions." He turned then, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something different in his expression. Not danger, not power, but exhaustion. "You're safe here," he said. "No one can reach you." "Safe," I repeated quietly, the word tasting foreign on my tongue. "That's what you said before the gun went off." He smiled faintly, though it wasn't his usual kind of smile, the one that promised sin and secrets. This one was sadder, more human. "In my world, safety is temporary," he said, "but I keep my promises." I looked at the bandage on his arm, the way it cut through his sleeve like a silent accusation. "You could have died." He shrugged, as if death was an inconvenience rather than a consequence. "It wouldn't be the first time someone tried to kill me." There was something in the way he said it, matter of fact, unshaken, that made my stomach twist. "Who are you really, Luca?" I asked softly. "No lies this time." He met my eyes then, his gaze steady, unflinching. "You already know," he said. "You just don't want to believe it." "Mafia," I whispered, the word falling between us like glass shattering. He didn't deny it. Instead, he walked toward me, every movement deliberate, predatory, graceful. "My father built an empire," he said quietly. "When he died, it became mine, whether I wanted it or not. The Romano name protects this city in ways the law never could, and punishes it in ways the law never will." I stared at him, trying to reconcile the man in front of me. The one who had saved me, who had danced with me, who had made me feel seen, with the man who could speak about violence as if it were destiny. And me? I asked. What am I to you? His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, something dangerous and tender all at once. You're the one thing I didn't plan for. The room went quiet except for the sound of the city breathing beyond the windows. He sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped lower. I told you once that I protect what's mine. That hasn't changed. I'm not yours, I said, though my voice trembled on the last word. He tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing just a fraction. Not yet, he murmured. But you will be. I wanted to argue, to stand up and tell him that no one owned me anymore, that I had already escaped one man who had mistaken control for love. But when Luca looked at me, I didn't feel trapped. I felt claimed. And somehow that was worse. He reached out, tracing a finger down my arm, slow and deliberate, until his hand rested against my wrist. His touch was warm, but beneath it was power, the kind that demanded surrender without saying a word. You want to believe I'm the villain, he said softly. It makes it easier to resist me. Are you saying you're not? He smiled, a small dangerous curve of his lips. I'm saying the world isn't that simple. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt alive, thick with something unspoken. I wanted to move, to break free from whatever spell he had cast, but my body refused to listen. Finally, he stood. There will be a car outside for you tomorrow morning, he said. It will take you to work. My men will follow. You won't see them, but they'll be there. Your men? I echoed. I don't need a bodyguard. His gaze sharpened, that quiet authority returning in full. You do, he said firmly. Ethan won't stop until he's made me pay for humiliating him, and the fastest way to get to me is through you. I froze. So I'm a target now. Luca's jaw tightened. You were the moment you danced with me. I felt the sting of his words, the weight of what they meant. Then why didn't you warn me? He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Because you wouldn't have listened. He was right. And that truth hurt more than I wanted to admit. Luca, I said quietly, this isn't protection, this is control. He took a slow breath, walked back to me and cupped my face in his hand. His thumb brushed against my lower lip, and for a moment everything else disappeared. The fear, the confusion, the chaos. There was only him. You're mistaking control for care, he whispered. The world I live in doesn't allow softness, Ava. If I don't protect what's mine, someone else will take it from me. I won't let that happen. My breath caught. You can't protect me from everything. No, he agreed, his eyes darkening. But I can protect you from him. From the men who think they can touch what I've already claimed. His words burned through me, terrifying and intoxicating all at once. He leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. You asked what I want from you, he said. This is it. I want your obedience, your trust, and your silence. In return, I'll give you safety, power, freedom from fear. That's the price of a dance, Bella Mia. I wanted to tell him no, to tell him that I couldn't live under someone else's shadow again. But the truth was, his presence made me feel safer than I'd felt in years. Maybe it was an illusion. Maybe it was madness. But when he touched me, the rest of the world faded. He let his hand fall away slowly, his gaze lingering on mine. Get some rest, he said quietly. Tomorrow your new life begins. When he left the room, the silence pressed against me like a confession I wasn't ready to make. I sank back against the couch, my heart racing, my mind spinning. I should have been angry. I should have been terrified, but instead I felt something far more dangerous, anticipation. Because even though I knew the cost, even though I understood the price of stepping into his world, I also knew that I was already too far gone to turn back. And as the city lights flickered against the window, I found myself whispering into the dark, "What are you doing to me, Luca?" The answer came hours later, when the sound of footsteps echoed outside the door. Soft, deliberate, unfamiliar. I wasn't alone. There is a certain kind of quiet that comes before ruin. A deceptive kind of calm that settles in the air right before the world decides to remind you that peace is never permanent, that safety is only borrowed, that everything you've been trying to hold together can unravel in a single, merciless heartbeat. That was the kind of morning it was when I woke in Luca's penthouse. Sunlight cutting through the sheer curtains in thin golden lines. The smell of espresso drifting from somewhere down the hall. The faint hum of a city that didn't know how close it was to the edge of violence. For a moment, I could almost pretend I belonged there. The suite was still and silent, the kind of silence that felt alive, charged with secrets and ghosts. I wandered through the space barefoot, fingers tracing the cold marble countertops, the tall shelves lined with old books and crystal decanters, the black and white photographs that showed a younger Luca standing beside men who looked powerful and dead inside. There was one photo that caught my breath. The same eyes, the same mouth, but softer, less hardened. Luca with another man, older, smiling. I didn't have to ask to know who it was. His father. The man whose empire he'd inherited. The one whose death had written blood into his son's hands. The sound of footsteps broke the silence. I turned and found Luca in the doorway, a phone in one hand, a dark look clouding his face. He was dressed for war again, black suit, black tie, the color of a man who didn't want the world to see him bleed. "You're awake," he said, his tone sharp but distracted, his mind clearly somewhere else. "Is something wrong?" I asked, watching the way his jaw clenched, the muscle ticking just beneath the surface of control. He set the phone on the table and exhaled slowly, his gaze lifting to meet mine. "There's been a leak." "A leak?" He nodded once, eyes darkening. "Someone released photos, you and me, the gala, the club, the balcony. They've been circulating since last night." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, photos?" "I mean the entire city now knows my face next to yours," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "They're saying you're my mistress, that I've gone soft, that the Romano name is being compromised because of a woman who doesn't belong in this world." The words stung more than they should have. "I know you didn't," he interrupted, his tone gentler but still weighted. "But that doesn't matter. In my world, perception is power, and perception can kill faster than bullets." I sank into the nearest chair, the air thick with dread. Who would do that? He looked away for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Ethan," he said finally. "It has his fingerprints all over it. He's using the press to get to me, to make me look weak. And he's not working alone." "Alone?" I echoed, my heart tightening. "There are people who've wanted me gone for years," Luca said, pacing slowly now, his hands in his pockets. "Rival families, old debts. They see this as an opportunity to make me bleed without pulling a trigger." The weight of it pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. "So what happens now?" He stopped pacing, his gaze snapping to mine. "Now I clean up the mess, and I make sure no one ever uses you against me again." His words were steady, but something in them frightened me. A quiet, dangerous promise that I didn't fully understand until later that day. Hours passed in a blur of phone calls and hushed conversations. Men in suits moving through the penthouse like shadows. I stayed near the windows, watching the city stretch endlessly below, feeling like a bird in a gilded cage. Protected, yes, but trapped all the same. Every now and then, I'd catch Luca watching me, his expression unreadable, as if he was calculating the cost of keeping me there. By evening, the tension had only thickened. The sky outside had turned the color of bruised metal, the kind of gray that warned of rain. Luca had been gone for hours, leaving me with a guard stationed outside the door, a silent man who didn't speak or blink or move unless necessary. I tried to distract myself, reading one of Luca's old books, but my mind kept circling back to Ethan, to the photos, the leak, the way he'd looked that night in the club, wild and desperate and furious. And then the phone rang. It wasn't the penthouse line. It was my own, the number I thought no one had anymore. I stared at the screen, the name glowing there like a scar that refused to heal. Ethan. My hand trembled as I answered. What do you want? His voice came through soft, mocking, too familiar. You sound nervous, sweetheart. Did your new boyfriend tell you what he really does with the people who cross him? Stop calling me that. He laughed, a dry, broken sound. Oh, come on, Ava. You really think Luca Romano is your savior? You think he's protecting you because he cares? He's using you the same way he uses everyone else. You don't know him, I said, though part of me hated how uncertain it sounded. Oh, I know him better than you think, Ethan said, his tone shifting. He's a killer, Ava. His hands are stained with blood, and soon yours will be too. You think you're safe in that glass tower of his, but you're just a pawn in his little empire. When it falls, and it will, you'll fall with him. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stood there for a long time, the phone still pressed to my ear, the silence ringing louder than any threat he could have made. And then I felt it. A chill crawling up my spine. The unmistakable sense of being watched. I turned toward the window. Across the street, in one of the countless buildings that faced Luca's penthouse, a faint red dot flickered once against the glass before disappearing. Luca, I whispered, panic clawing at my throat. I didn't even have time to move before the door burst open. Luca's men were shouting, pulling me to the floor, the sound of shattering glass filling the room. A bullet tore through the air where I'd been standing seconds before. The world spun in chaos. Shouts, the crack of gunfire, the smell of gunpowder and fear. And then Luca was there. He appeared through the smoke like some dark storm, gun in hand, barking orders in Italian, his voice sharp and lethal. Within seconds, the firing stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. He dropped to his knees beside me, his hands cupping my face, his voice rougher than I'd ever heard it. Are you hurt? I shook my head, too stunned to speak. His thumb brushed a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. He found me, I whispered. Luca's jaw tightened. No, he said, his tone cutting like steel. He found me. He stood, looking toward the shattered window, the skyline beyond painted in fire and shadow. He wants a war, he said quietly, and now he's going to get one. I reached for him, my voice trembling. Luca, please don't. He turned back to me, his expression dark and resolute. You asked me once what it means to live in my world, he said. This is what it means. Every choice has a price, every moment of peace is a lie, and every dance ends in blood. He took my hand, pressing it against his chest, where his heartbeat thundered beneath my palm. You're in this now, Ava, he whispered. There's no going back. And in that moment, as the city lights flickered against the broken glass, and the first drops of rain began to fall, I realized that he wasn't just protecting me anymore. He was preparing to destroy everything that threatened to take me from him, even if it meant burning the entire world to the ground. It's strange how quickly fear can become a part of your bloodstream, how it moves through you like an echo that never fades, reshaping every breath, every thought, until even silence feels like a threat waiting to happen. After the attack, I didn't sleep for 3 nights. Every shadow stretched too long, Every sound felt sharp enough to cut through my nerves. Luca doubled the guards, replaced the windows, moved meetings into hidden rooms beneath Il Diavolo. And still, I could see it in his eyes, that quiet tension of a man who knew control was slipping through his fingers. He didn't talk much those days. He worked. He ordered. He planned. But in the rare moments we were alone, I saw glimpses of something that unsettled me more than the violence outside. Fear. Not for himself, but for me. And that fear was contagious. I tried to convince him to let me leave the city, to disappear until things settled. But he refused, his voice calm but final. "If you run, they'll find you," he said one night as he poured whiskey into a crystal glass, the amber light reflecting off his watch, his cufflinks, the faint scar that ran along his wrist. "If you stay, I can protect you. The moment you vanish from my sight, you're already dead." He didn't say it to scare me. He said it because it was the truth. I told myself to trust him, that the man who had taken a bullet for me wouldn't let anything happen to me. But deep down, beneath the layers of reason and denial, I felt it. The inevitability. That something was coming for me. That some part of this story was going to demand a sacrifice. And I was right. It happened on a Thursday, the kind of day that felt almost too ordinary to belong in a life like mine. The sky was gray, the air heavy with the scent of rain, and the city moved with its usual rhythm. Cars, chatter, life pretending it wasn't standing on a knife's edge. Luca had left early for a meeting with one of his capos, promising to be back by evening. "Stay inside," he'd said as he kissed the side of my head, his lips lingering just long enough for me to feel the weight behind the gesture. "I'll send Matteo to keep an eye on you." Matteo, one of his oldest men, a quiet giant who spoke only when absolutely necessary. I didn't like him. Too serious, too unreadable. But Luca trusted him. And that had to be enough. By noon, the penthouse was still, the only sound the soft hum of the city below. I was reading on the couch when Matteo appeared in the doorway. "Miss Ava," he said, his voice steady, polite. "Luca called. He wants you to meet him downstairs. He said it's urgent." Something about the way he said it made me pause. "He told me to stay here," I said slowly, closing my book. Matteo hesitated only a second. "Plans changed," he said. "He said to hurry." I didn't question it further. I should have. The elevator ride was silent, the air thick with that electric unease I couldn't quite name. When the doors opened to the lobby, I expected to see Luca waiting by the car, maybe another one of his men nearby. But the space was empty. "Where is he?" I asked, turning to Matteo. That's when I saw it, the flicker of hesitation in his eyes, the briefest glance toward the street outside before everything went dark. When I woke, the first thing I felt was cold concrete beneath my hands. The air smelled like rust and gasoline. A single light flickered above me, casting the room in a sickly yellow glow. My head throbbed, and when I tried to move, pain shot through my wrists, tied tightly behind my back. Panic rose fast and sharp. Then I heard the voice. "Welcome back, sweetheart." Ethan stepped into the light. He looked different this time, tired, hollow, his once perfect suit wrinkled, his smile stretched too thin to be human. "You didn't really think you could hide behind him forever, did you?" he said, crouching down in front of me, his tone somewhere between affection and venom. I glared at him, my throat dry. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted," he said simply. "You." My heart pounded. "You're insane." "Maybe," he said, laughing softly. "But at least I'm honest about it. Can't say the same for your boyfriend." "Did he tell you how this started? Did he tell you that I didn't just stumble into his world? That I was invited?" I stared at him, confusion slicing through the fear. "What are you talking about?" Ethan leaned closer, his eyes bright with something unhinged. He used you, Ava. He wanted me close so he could watch me fall. I worked for him once before you ever met him. I did things, dirty things, for his family. And when I became inconvenient, when I started asking for more than scraps, he destroyed me. You were just the final touch, a way to humiliate me. I shook my head. That's not true. Isn't it? He stood and began pacing slowly. You think you just met him by chance? That a man like Luca Romano walks into a gala and dances with a stranger for no reason? He saw you months before that night. You were part of the plan. The world seemed to tilt. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him he was lying, but the seed of doubt had already taken root. Luca doesn't love you, Ava, Ethan said quietly. He owns you, just like he owned me. And when he's done, when you've served your purpose, he'll let you burn too. Before I could answer, the door burst open. 2 men entered, strangers, armed, their expressions blank. Ethan turned to them, smirking. Get ready, he said. He'll come for her. And when he does, he'll walk right into the trap. The words barely registered before they dragged me to my feet. I struggled, kicked, shouted his name, but it was useless. They pushed me into a van, the smell of oil and metal thick in the air, the city flashing by in blurs of gray and red. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I couldn't tell anymore. Then the van stopped. I was dragged again, down a long hall that smelled of damp stone and salt. Somewhere distant, water dripped in slow, echoing intervals. When they tied me to a chair and left, the silence that followed was worse than the noise. But then I heard it. The sound of footsteps, steady and unhurried. Ethan, I whispered, but it wasn't him. It was Luca. He stood in the doorway, his suit ruined, his eyes darker than I'd ever seen them. Behind him, men moved like shadows, silent and armed. For a moment, everything froze, the world narrowing to the space between us. I told you to stay inside, he said quietly. I tried, I whispered, my throat tight. He tricked me. His gaze shifted past me toward the darkness where Ethan waited. I know, he said, and now he'll learn what happens when someone touches what's mine. Luca, I started, but he didn't let me finish. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, like a man walking through fire. His men followed, their weapons raised. And in that moment, I realized that the man who had once made me dance beneath chandeliers was the same man who could burn kingdoms for revenge. Because love, in Luca's world, was never about softness. It was about destruction. And tonight, someone was going to pay for touching the flame. The first thing I remember is the sound, the echo of boots hitting wet stone, the soft metallic click of weapons being cocked, the low murmur of men who knew they were seconds away from violence. Then came his voice, steady and smooth, cutting through the dark, like a blade made of smoke and promise. Let her go, Luca said, and though the words were calm, there was something in them that vibrated with restrained fury, the kind that could split the air if pushed too far. I couldn't see him clearly at first. The room was half dark, lit only by a single hanging bulb that swung slightly with the draft, casting cruel shadows over the walls. But I could feel him. His presence filled the space before his figure even stepped into the light. He moved like he had no fear, like every step was already written, like he had danced this kind of death before. Ethan's laugh echoed from the corner, sharp and jagged, the sound of a man who had lost everything and found comfort in the ruin. You actually came, he said, his voice laced with disbelief and triumph. I thought the great Luca Romano sent other people to do his dirty work. Luca's eyes didn't waver. When someone touches what's mine, I do it myself. The words hit me like a physical thing, possessive, dangerous, but also heavy with something I couldn't name. Because even though part of me wanted to hate him for it, another part, the broken part, the one that had learned too well what it meant to be afraid, found comfort in the way his voice didn't shake. Ethan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You think this is about her?" he asked. "You think I care about your little pet? This is about you. You took everything from me, Luca. Everything I built. Every ounce of respect I had. You made me crawl, and I swore I'd make you bleed for it." Luca tilted his head slightly, his voice lowering to something quiet and lethal. "And instead you used her." Ethan's expression hardened. "You used her first." For a moment, everything went silent. So silent I could hear the slow drip of water hitting concrete somewhere behind me. I looked at Luca then, searching his face, but he didn't look at me. His gaze was locked on Ethan, his expression unreadable, like a storm building behind glass. "You think you understand my world," Luca said, his tone even, almost detached. "But you don't. You think betrayal makes you strong, but it only makes you predictable." "Predictable?" Ethan spat. "You think I didn't plan for this? You think I didn't know you'd come?" He stepped backward toward the door, and that's when I saw it. A small red light blinking on the support beam behind him. A timer. Luca saw it too. His eyes flicked to it, then back to Ethan. "You set explosives in a room you're standing in," he said quietly. "You really have lost your mind." Ethan's laugh was sharp, almost manic. "You don't get it. I've already lost everything that mattered. So what's left to lose?" The seconds ticked by like thunder waiting to strike. I felt the pulse of fear rising in my chest, the air thickening. "Luca," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Please." He looked at me then, just for a moment, and in that fraction of a heartbeat, the mask he wore cracked enough for me to see it. The fear, not for himself, but for me. "Close your eyes," he said softly. Then everything happened at once. Luca moved first, faster than I thought humanly possible, lunging forward as the sound of gunfire exploded through the room. His men swept in behind him, shouts filling the air, bullets slicing through the shadows. The smell of gunpowder hit like acid. I dropped to the floor, chair and all, the impact jarring through my body. I heard someone scream, Ethan maybe, or one of the guards, and then another shot, louder than the rest. The light overhead flickered violently, swinging like a pendulum, throwing the chaos into fragments of light and darkness. And then, through the smoke, I saw him, Luca, his face streaked with dust, his jaw set in that same terrible calm. He reached me in seconds, kneeling beside me as the battle raged behind him. His hands moved quickly, cutting through the ropes that bound me, his voice low and commanding even as the world burned around us. "Stay down," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "Do you trust me?" "Yes," I breathed, the word trembling but true. He nodded once, then pulled me against him, shielding me as another blast of gunfire echoed through the hall. The timer on the beam flashed faster now, seconds bleeding away. Luca looked toward it, calculation flashing across his face, then grabbed my hand. "We have to move." We ran. The corridor was narrow, the air thick with smoke and fire. I could feel the heat biting at my skin, could hear the building groaning under the weight of destruction. Somewhere behind us, Ethan shouted something, my name maybe. But Luca didn't look back. His hand stayed locked in mine, his grip strong, certain, leading me through the chaos with the same precision he used on the dance floor. When we reached the exit, the explosion hit. The force threw us forward, slamming me against the pavement outside. My ears rang, the world spinning in blurs of light and sound. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I felt him beside me, his body covering mine, his breath hot and ragged against my neck. "Luca," I gasped. "Are you—" "I'm fine," he said, though his voice was hoarse, strained. He pushed himself up slowly, wincing, blood trailing from a cut along his temple. It's over. But it wasn't. Ethan stumbled out of the smoke, coughing, half-burned, eyes wild. He held a gun, his hand shaking, his voice breaking as he screamed, "You think you win, Luca? You think you get to keep everything?" He raised the weapon, but Luca didn't flinch. He just stepped in front of me, placing himself between us like it was instinct, like he'd been born to shield me. Ethan fired. The shot cracked through the night. Luca jerked backward, the sound of it tearing through me. I screamed, catching him as he fell, my hands slick with blood. "No, no, no, no," I whispered, my voice shaking, my vision blurring. His hand came up, brushing weakly against my cheek, his fingers leaving streaks of red against my skin. "I told you I'd protect you," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Don't you dare!" I choked out, gripping his shoulders. "Don't you dare leave me!" Behind us, sirens wailed, the city waking to the sound of destruction. Luca's men swarmed forward, tackling Ethan to the ground, shouting orders. But all I could see was him. "Stay with me," I begged. "Please." He smiled faintly, even as his eyes began to close. "You should have run, Bella Mia," he whispered. "You should have run before I found you." And then he went still. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then I felt hands pulling me away, voices shouting, the heat of the fire washing over everything. They told me later that he survived, that the bullet missed his heart by an inch, that his bodyguards got him to the hospital in time. But in that moment, kneeling on the cold pavement, his blood on my hands, his name on my lips, I thought he was gone. And maybe in some ways, the man I had known was gone, because when he woke days later, his eyes were different. Harder, colder, filled with something that looked too much like vengeance. He had saved me. He had nearly died for me. But the part of him that could still be saved had burned in that warehouse, along with the man he used to be. And as I stood by his bedside, listening to the steady beeping of machines, I realized something I had been running from since the first night he asked me to dance. I hadn't just fallen in love with a man. I had fallen in love with the monster he'd become to protect me. There is something almost cruel about hospitals at night. The way their hallways hum with a sterile kind of quiet. The way the air feels heavy with secrets that never make it past dawn. The way grief and hope blend together until you can't tell one from the other. I sat there beside Luca's bed, the machines humming their mechanical lullaby, the faint scent of antiseptic crawling under my skin, and I tried to remember what it felt like to breathe without fear. He looked almost peaceful in the dim light, his face pale against the white sheets, a bandage winding across his shoulder and chest like a cruel reminder of how close I had come to losing him. His body was still, but I could see his strength even in rest. The tension in his jaw, the faint crease between his brows, the way his hand, resting on the blanket, remained half-curled, as though even unconscious he refused to let go of control. I wanted to reach for him, to run my fingers through his hair, to whisper that I was here, that he wasn't alone. But the truth was, I didn't know if he'd even want that. Because ever since the warehouse, ever since the fire and the blood and the sound of his body hitting the ground, something between us had shifted. He had saved me, yes, but the cost of that salvation had changed him. When he finally opened his eyes 2 days later, there was something colder in them. Something harder, sharper, stripped of the warmth I'd glimpsed in rare moments when the walls around him cracked. He didn't speak much. He gave orders to his men from the hospital bed, his voice low and precise, as though nothing had happened, as though the bullet hadn't nearly taken his life. And yet, when our eyes met, I could feel it. That same connection, that same invisible thread that had bound me to him from the first dance. "Are you in pain?" I asked softly one evening, my voice breaking the silence between us. He turned his head slightly, his gaze finding mine. "Pain reminds me I'm alive," he said. It's the silence after that's harder to live with. You don't have to carry all of this alone, I said, reaching for his hand. You don't always have to be the one who fights. His lips curved faintly, though the smile didn't reach his eyes. That's where you're wrong, Bella Mia. I've built a life that only survives through strength. Weakness is the kind of thing people smell, and when they do, they come for blood. That's not living, Luca, I whispered. That's surviving. He didn't answer, and for a moment the silence between us said everything that words couldn't. Later that night, when I thought he had drifted back to sleep, I stepped out into the corridor to clear my head. The hallway lights were dim, the world outside the windows dark and wet with rain. I walked aimlessly, my thoughts circling like vultures. Ethan, the fire, the way Luca had looked at me in that last moment before collapsing, the way his voice had broken when he told me to run. I didn't notice the man until I heard him speak. Miss Moretti. The voice made me freeze. It was smooth, polite, but it carried that same quiet authority that all of Luca's men had. I turned to see a stranger. Tall, dressed in black, his expression blank. He wasn't one of Luca's usual guards. Yes, I said, my heart quickening. Mr. Romano sent me, he said, offering a small nod. He needs you to come with me. It's urgent. Every instinct in me screamed to question him, to call Luca, to demand proof. But exhaustion and fear make dangerous companions, and I followed before my mind could catch up to my body. We walked down the corridor, past the nurse's station, through a side door that led to the underground parking lot. The air was colder down there, the hum of the fluorescent lights loud and uneven. He stopped beside a black car and opened the rear door. Please, he said, gesturing for me to get in. Something in his tone made my stomach twist. I hesitated. Where are we going? He smiled, a small, practiced curve of his lips. To see Mr. Romano. And then, before I could move, before I could think, something sharp pressed against my neck. A sting. A whisper. Darkness. When I woke again, the world was spinning. The air smelled of salt and metal. My wrists were bound, my throat dry, my vision blurred. The room was small, the light dim, the sound of waves crashing somewhere beyond the walls. I wasn't in the city anymore. And then I heard him. Hello, darling. Ethan stepped out of the shadows, his smile brittle, his eyes wild. Miss me? My pulse pounded, terror mixing with disbelief. How are you? Luca said... Oh, Luca says a lot of things, he interrupted, circling me slowly. You really thought a man like that could kill me and not make sure I left something behind? No, Ava. He failed. And now we finish what he started. What do you want? I asked, my voice shaking. He crouched in front of me, his eyes glittering. I want him to hurt, he said softly. The way he made me hurt. I want to take from him the only thing he's ever cared about. My stomach dropped. Me? Bingo. He stood again, pacing. You see, Ava, he took everything, my business, my connections, my pride. But you? You're his weakness. His flaw. And when he comes for you, and we both know he will, I'll finally get to see what the great Luca Romano looks like when the thing he loves dies in front of him. You're insane, I whispered. He smiled, almost tenderly. Insanity's just another word for freedom. Hours passed in agonizing slowness. The sun sank. The sound of the waves grew louder. I tried to fight the ropes, tried to scream, but the gag was tight and my body was weak. I thought about Luca, about the way he had looked at me, about the promise in his voice when he said he would protect me, about the way he had told me once that love was a battlefield dressed in silk. I knew he was coming. I could feel it, the same way I could feel the tide pulling closer to shore before a storm. And he did come. It was nearly midnight when the sound of engines broke through the silence, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. Ethan froze, his smile faltering for the first time. Shouts erupted outside, the door splintered open, and then, through the chaos, through the fire and smoke, Luca stepped into the room. He looked different, his eyes burning with fury, his body tense with purpose, blood spattered across his shirt, his gun raised without hesitation. He looked like vengeance dressed in flesh. Ethan spun toward me, grabbing me by the shoulders, pressing something cold and sharp against my throat. "Take one more step," he snarled, "and she dies." Luca's gaze flicked to mine, then to the knife, and then back to Ethan. His voice was calm, deadly. "Let her go, and I'll give you what you want." "What I want," Ethan hissed, "is to see you break." The next few seconds felt like eternity. The rain pounding outside, the wind howling through broken glass, the air thick with the smell of fear and gasoline. I felt Ethan's grip tighten, felt the blade bite into my skin, felt the world narrow to one single impossible moment. And then Luca moved. It was a blur. One shot. One flash. One heartbeat. And Ethan's body went still. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the room, fading into silence. He collapsed at my feet, his eyes wide, his lips parted in disbelief. Luca dropped the gun. He rushed to me, cutting the ropes, pulling me against him with trembling hands. His breath was ragged, his heart hammering against my cheek. "It's over," he whispered. "It's over now." But as I looked past him, at the flickering light, at the dark stain spreading across the floor, I saw something else. A small red dot blinking on the far wall, faint but steady. Another timer. And this one was counting down. I grabbed his hand, my voice breaking. "Luca, it's not over." He turned, saw it, and for the first time since I'd met him, fear flashed in his eyes. 5 seconds. 4. 3. He pulled me close, his arms tightening around me, his voice low and fierce against my ear. "Hold on to me, Ava. 2. 1. And then the world exploded. The world ended in fire, and then it began again in silence. When I opened my eyes, I didn't see light at first. I saw ash, gray and endless, swirling in the air like snow that had forgotten what purity looked like. My body ached everywhere, bones heavy, lungs raw from smoke, head pounding in rhythm with my heartbeat. I could taste blood, faint and metallic on my tongue, and for a moment I didn't know where I was, who I was, whether I was still part of the living, or just a memory trapped between one explosion and the next. And then I heard his voice. "Ava." It was rough, broken but unmistakable. "Luca." I turned, every muscle screaming, and there he was, half covered in dust, blood trickling down the side of his face, his shirt torn open where the blast had thrown him, his hand reaching toward me like a promise made before the end of the world. He was alive. Barely, but alive. He dragged himself closer, his movements slow, deliberate, every inch of his body carved with pain. When his hand finally found mine, he exhaled, a trembling sound that carried both relief and devastation. "You're here," he murmured, as if he still couldn't believe it. "I thought we were dead," I whispered, my throat dry and raw. "Maybe we are," he said, his lips curving faintly. "But at least we're together." We lay there for what felt like hours, or maybe minutes. I couldn't tell anymore, surrounded by the wreckage of everything that had come before. The warehouse was gone. Half of it collapsed into itself, flames flickering weakly where beams had fallen. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, faint and far away, like the world was mourning from another place entirely. He tried to sit up, wincing, his breath uneven. "We have to move before they come." "Who?" I asked weakly. He looked toward the shattered doorway, where the faint outline of dawn had begun to bleed through. "Everyone," he said simply. "Law, rivals, ghosts. They'll all come for what's left." "And what's left?" I asked softly, knowing the answer before he said it. He looked at me, his gaze dark and infinite. Us. Hours later, I woke again, this time in a place that smelled of salt and sea wind. I was lying in a soft bed, wrapped in sheets that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. Through the open window, I could hear the ocean, waves rolling against the rocks, the kind of steady rhythm that felt almost human in its persistence. For a moment, I wondered if I was dreaming. Then I saw him. Luca sat by the window, his body wrapped in bandages, a cigarette burning between his fingers, the smoke curling lazily in the morning light. His hair was messy, his jaw shadowed with exhaustion. But his eyes, those storm-dark eyes that had haunted and saved me, were still as sharp as ever. "You're awake," he said softly, exhaling smoke toward the ceiling. "Where are we?" "Off the coast. An old villa that used to belong to my family. No one knows it exists." "So we're hiding," I said quietly. He gave a small smile, tired but sincere. "We're surviving." For a while, neither of us spoke. The ocean kept whispering outside, the sound folding over itself like memory. I looked at him, the man who had been a stranger, a savior, a monster, and something far too complicated to name. And I realized that I no longer knew where fear ended and love began. Finally, I asked the question that had been burning in me since the night everything exploded. "Was any of it real, Luca?" He looked at me then, really looked, and the weight of his gaze made my chest ache. "What do you mean?" "The dance, the protection, the promises. Was it all part of some game? Did you use me like he said?" For a moment, he said nothing. He just took a slow drag of his cigarette, the ember flaring briefly in the dim light, before he stood and crossed the room to me. He crouched beside the bed, his hand finding my cheek, his thumb tracing a faint streak of soot still on my skin. "When I saw you that night at the gala," he said quietly, "I told myself it was strategy, that you were a distraction, that I needed to use you to draw him out. And maybe in the beginning that was true. But then..." He paused, his eyes darkening. "Then you looked at me like you saw the man beneath the monster, and I didn't know how to stop wanting that." My throat tightened. "You should have told me." "I couldn't," he whispered. "You would have run, and if you'd run, he would have found you long before I did." I wanted to hate him for the truth, but I couldn't. Because somewhere deep down, I knew he was right. Every step I'd taken since that first dance had been a fall, but it had been a fall that led me here. To him. To this fragile, terrible love that had survived things it never should have. I turned my face into his palm, closing my eyes. "So what happens now?" He sighed, the sound low and rough. "Now I disappear. The Romano name is finished. The city will think I'm dead, and that's the way it has to be." "And me?" "You'll live," he said simply. "You'll go back to your life. You'll be free." Something inside me broke at that word. "Free?" I repeated, shaking my head. "Free from what?" "You've become the air I breathe, Luca. You think I can just walk away and pretend none of this happened?" He looked at me with that quiet sadness I'd come to recognize. The look of a man who's already chosen the path that will destroy him. "If you stay, you'll die in my world. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually it'll take everything from you. I won't let it." "I don't want your world," I said. "I just want you." He smiled then, but it was a broken thing, fragile and beautiful. "You already have me, Bella Mia. You always did." He leaned in, his lips brushing mine, a kiss that tasted like goodbye, like smoke and salt and sorrow. His hand lingered against my neck, his thumb tracing my pulse as if memorizing the beat. When he pulled away, his voice was a whisper. "Dance with me." "What?" He stood, extending his hand. "One last time." I hesitated, then took it. We stood in the middle of the small room, barefoot, the ocean breeze spilling through the window, the morning light painting everything gold. There was no music, no chandeliers, no crowd, just us. His arm slid around my waist, his hand finding the small of my back. And as we moved, slow and unhurried, I realized that this was the truest version of us. No lies, no power, no blood. Just two broken people trying to remember what it felt like to be whole. He leaned down, his voice low against my ear. "When you think of me, don't remember the man who killed for you. Remember this." I nodded, tears burning behind my eyes. "Promise me you won't disappear." He smiled sadly. "I already have." The words hung there, soft and devastating. And before I could speak, he was gone, his warmth fading from my hands, his shadow slipping away like a ghost at sunrise. Outside, the waves crashed against the rocks, relentless and eternal. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where he had been. And then, without realizing it, I began to move again. Slowly, silently, my body remembering the rhythm of his touch. The world was still broken, but in that moment, I wasn't. Because for all the lies, all the danger, all the blood, he had given me something no one else ever could. He had taught me how to stop running from the fire and start dancing inside it. And maybe that's what love really is. Not safety, not perfection, but the courage to burn and the grace to rise again, even if all that's left of you is smoke. So I danced. For him. For me. For everything we lost and everything we became. And somewhere in the rhythm between the waves and the silence, I could almost hear his voice again. Low, dark, and eternal. "Dance with me, Ava. Just one more time."